Okay, all right. So it's
See that.
my pet pleasure to introduce one of my dearest friends, Paul Berger, who is currently the Alaska Regional Hydrologist for the National Park Service. He's been actively involved in mapping and exploring caves since 1985. He first became involved in Lechuguilla exploration in 1988 and has been an active mapper and cartographer, you'd think I'd be able to say that one right, and cartographer ever since. He is a co-author of the book Deep Secrets, which if you haven't read is a history of the exploration of Lechuguilla Cave, which covered the first 50 miles and has authored numerous additional exploration and scientific articles on caves in the Guadalupe Mountains. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Hazel. So I'm going to talk about the second 50 miles of exploration, and to mimic what Pat said, we also kind of consider this the great fuzzening. It was funny that she used the same phrase that I did. So the cave hit 50 miles in August of 1990, and it basically has this overall structure that we still see today, with the major branches of the cave, western borehole, southwest, and then the near east and far east, and plus a little area off of the rift just called the North Rift. So fundamentally, it has not really changed since then. But at that same time as we hit 50 miles, there was some stuff going on outside the park, which ended up being pretty important to exploration. There were several proposals to begin oil and gas drilling north of the park. So the BLM began an environmental impact statement to exclude drilling and protect the cave from impacts. We now know this area is the Lechuguilla Cave Protection Zone. But as part of that process, the park really pushed cavers to start exploring along the northern boundary of the cave to prove that the cave went in that direction and that direct impacts to the cave from the drilling would be possible. The most promising kind of north bounding areas were the entrance area, North Rift, the northern edge of the western borehole, and then the northern edge of the Near East and Far East. So the first trip in 1991 was in the upper Near East out of Ghost Town, an area called Ghost Riders Hall that I don't have any pictures of. It didn't significantly break the northern boundary of the cave, but was a significant expansion. On the next expedition, focus was on the western borehole along the northern edge. There was a promising climb near the leaning tower area of the western borehole that ended up leading into the Northwest Passage. This is the bottom of the climb. And it led into this nice gypsum and calcite coated ascending passage that went into some nice walking passage and significantly broke out of the former boundary of the western borehole to the north and brought the cave up to nearly 55 miles. So obviously on the next expedition, they went back and continued pushing the Northwest Passage to an area called Hudson Bay that had this nice perched lake and these old raft cones and this large ascending passage. This passage led to an area, for obvious reasons, called Spar City, and these are giant calcite spar crystals, and led into some other areas that weren't as coated with spar, but still kept going. In the meantime, near Deep Seas Camp, there was another climb done to an area called Red Seas. And that was a series of these perched paleo pools with some pretty nice little kind of aragonite islands in them. And some pretty nice flowstone. And at the end of the Red Sea Passage, the cave dropped back down basically to the borehole level, but was characterized by these big, thick mammillary coatings and cemented calcite rafts. Exploration in the Red Sea, Dead Sea area, Northwest Passage was cut short because, as you'll find out a little bit later today, this was also the expedition where Emily got hurt in the Fubar area of the western borehole. So that brought exploration to a halt on that expedition to facilitate the rescue. But in spite of that, they were still able to get the cave up to nearly 57 miles. When the expeditions resumed, obviously the main focus of attention was back in the Northwest Passage area, because it was still going, to the 3 o'clock staircase and a passage called Avienda Sombra. In August of 91, the big push wasn't as much for exploration, but assistance with Kim Cunningham's helium study, which we'll hear about during the science stuff tomorrow. But the gist of it was he released helium in the western borehole to find out how the air in the cave moved between the different branches, and most importantly, if air from inside the cave showed up at any of the blowholes north of the cave. Again, this is to establish a connection between the known areas of Lechuguilla Cave and areas further to the north. There were still some surveys done towards the end of the western borehole, the EVI survey, some additional work in Red Seas, and then some mop up in the High Hopes area. The end of 91 resulted in another big change in the history of management of the cave. The MOU between the Lechuguilla Cave Project Incorporated and the Park Service was canceled because of some data sharing issues, increased cave impacts, and some other problems. During this time, the cavers developed a new group called the Lechuguilla Exploration Research Network, or LEARN, to try to establish a more democratic representative organization to provide opportunities for new strong cavers to participate. And one of the most important things was to develop a cadre of expedition leaders so that there be long-term continuity in the project. And many of the expedition leaders who came on board during the Learn days are still some of the most active expedition leaders today. The other aspect of Learn was to develop an organized way to maintain data, survey notes, and organize the cartography in a way that not one person was basically in charge of trying to draft the entire cave. The Park Service decided that there would basically be a roughly even split between the private expeditions, which is just a term for the non-Learn expeditions, and then the Learn expeditions. So obviously, cavers were anxious to get back to the western borehole area when exploration began again in January of 93. One of the first places that people pushed was another climb out of the Northwest Passage area called Here Be Dragons. And this is the bottom of the climb. This is the top of that climb. And it led to a maze of nicely decorated cave passage. At the same time, pushing was still being done in the Red Sea, Dead Sea area. The Needle Park maze was found. In addition, Topless Dome and some survey around Land of Fire and Ice in the Far East were also discovered. In March and April of 93, the biggest breakthrough was actually in the Neverland area off of the Dead Sea, Red Sea area, and then the Anniversary Passage at the end of the western borehole, bringing the cave up to just a little over 66 miles. Again, you'll notice that some of these changes, you're just seeing just a little bit of passage added in kind of the same areas, filling in. By the end of August of 93, really the only breakout was the MYB survey in the Far East. It was sort of a lone finger sticking out of the passage there, and didn't end up filling in a whole bunch more after that. In December of 93, the biggest discovery was Blanca Navidad, which is one of the few places where you still have these really big intact gypsum glaciers. And this was found out of the Needle Park area. And at the same time, even though I don't have any pictures of it, pushing was still being done in the North Rift area, again, trying to push the cave to the north. But we found an area called Kryptonite Hall, which has some of the barite crystals in it that you'll hear about also tomorrow, and added significant passage to the North Rift, and bringing the cave up to just a little over 69 miles. Oops. So at the start of 94, this is what the cave looked like. Efforts were still concentrated in the west. This time, the big push was looking at the ascending breakdown of Hard Day's Night Hall. Hard Day's Night Hall is a big room at the end of the western borehole, and is characterized by a giant mountain of breakdown that you go up and over, and then eventually end up in the jackpot room and some other places. But people had always been curious as to where all that breakdown had come from. There are a lot of intriguing holes in the ceiling and along the edges, but it had not really been pushed that hard. So here you can see kind of where the exploration was done out of Hard Day's Night. And then in April of '94, that area continued to be pushed and broke into the Wild West, leading to the outpost. During that same expedition, a team was trying to investigate a survey error and a kind of cryptic note found on flagging tape in the western borehole, just trying to fix some data issues and survey errors, and dug through a hole called the Widowmaker into south winds, this nicely ascending aragonite-filled upper level. Now, while these breakthroughs didn't end up going to the north, they were, again, a significant excursion off of the edge of the western borehole. In July of '94, that area was continued to be pushed. The South Winds area was pushed all the way to Southern Cross. Excuse me. And the readout area was found off of the Northwest Passage. In October of '94, they pushed a high lead out of Southern Cross into Motherlode. When they were in Southern Cross and some areas down below, they found lots of these big broken speleothems kind of in the rubble, so that they knew there had to be a big space up above. And this is what they ended up finding, is this large room up in the back reef with a lot of big stalactites and stalagmites, massive flowstone, and a lot of these had big cracks running through it that the suggestion is it came from, were caused by earthquakes and stuff in the distant past. At the same time that area, the Zonker Maze and Motherlode, was being explored, there was a small breakthrough in December of '94 off of the Deliverance Passage in the southwest, an ascending area called K2. So at the start of 1995, the cave was sitting at 77.4 miles. Exploration continued in south winds up to an area called Southern Climbs, which again, like much of the cave, had these really nice gypsum flowers and gypsum coatings, and still continued to push its way down to the south towards the K2 area. Beyond Southern Climbs, they found Magnolia Bayou, and that area was pushed to a big flowstone area that ended in a lake called Lake Okeechobee. Because of the new management rules in the cave, particularly to collect water area, protect water areas because of the biology, exploration was not allowed beyond Lake Okeechobee, and that was the case for more than 10 years before it was finally able to be pushed. So here you can see where Lake Okeechobee ends. You can see where there's been more pushing in K2, and you can see from the colors, which indicate elevation, that these two areas are actually getting close to the same level, though they've not yet been connected. One other interesting thing to note is that during Kim Cunningham's helium study, which was actually released kind of where Northwest Passage comes into the Western Borehole, one of the first places that the helium was actually detected inside the cave was in the southwest branch, in the prickly ice cube room, which is the kind of large blob kind of to the right of that K2 symbol. So again, we end up with some management issues. Multiple issues led to exploration shutting down again. The park was concerned with some of the impacts that were going on, also with the lack of progress on some of the maps and areas being resurveyed. So in response to that, the park developed a new cave and karst management plan, primarily to reduce the impacts on the cave. And much of that was done by reducing the number of camps allowed in the cave and the number of people allowed in each of the camps. It established a system for photo monitoring, particularly impact monitoring in areas that had a lot of visitation. like I said, reduced the number of total number of expeditions and the number of people on those expeditions. And at that point, the park took over the direct active management of the data, the notes, and the cartography, working with the cartographers to try to make progress on the maps. At that time, the park also introduced the new guidelines with regards to important microbiological habitat, especially pools, and protecting those pools. So at the start of 97, the cave was sitting at 83.8 miles. When the cave reopened, obviously the cavers were eager to get back to those areas of at the end of the western borehole, particularly the South Winds area. So the next trips in, you see a little bit of breakout in the sanctuary area. Although that's close to the Northwest Passage extension, it's actually found from the end of the western borehole. And then there was more pushing done in the K2 area in hopes of connecting it over into the South Winds area. As the year progresses, you can see little additions here and there, but most of the big breakout work was occurring in the sanctuary area. And then you can see the green kind of in the middle of the maze there. That's when the Chandelier Graveyard really started being actively pushed, and a lot of resurvey being done to get that map up to date. Again, in October, you see most of the work is being done in the sanctuary area, and I apologize for not actually having any good pictures of the sanctuary, as is the case that we found when we wrote Deep Secrets and putting all these presentations together. People take lots of pictures of the cool, pretty passages, but all the gnarly stuff in between and the crawlways and stuff like that, you don't really get a lot of pictures of. And again, more work in sanctuary, more work in the Chandelier Graveyard. So at the start of 1998, the cave was sitting at 86.5 miles. And then this is where we really saw a lot of the focus change to fixing loops and doing a lot of resurvey to get the maps up to date. There was a little bit of work still done in sanctuary, but a lot of the new survey that was added to the cave was down in the Voids and Chandelier Maze area. And a lot of those extensions were really due to resurveying some bad loops and then mapping all of the side leads off of it. And you can also see in the Near East, and that's the lower Near East, at that time, there were a lot of the loops being fixed in that area to get that quad map finished as well. The only really big breakthrough that happened during this time was at the end of the western borehole, but instead of going up, teams pushed down into a lower level called Frostworks. The Frostworks area appears to be kind of a combination of big breakdown and boneyard. So they coined the term breakyard for this area. And obviously you can see from this photo and then this photo that the reasons it's called Frostworks is because the whole area is characterized and coated by these nice, delicate aragonite formations. So here you can see Frostworks. There was a little bit of work done around the Adobe Room in South Winds, but the majority of the work that you see over the next couple of slides will be done down in Frostworks. They pushed the Frostworks area and actually ended up coming back up into the borehole level right between the trail flagging. So it's very conservation minded of them to do that, but also kind of tells you that, even though some of these trails have been around for a long time, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single little hole in the floor has actually been pushed. So again, you can see the Frostworks area, which is this lower level, really expanding all over the place. And adding most of the footage to the cave. December of 98 was the Frostworks continued to be pushed, and then there was some pushing done in the far east in looking at the La Mirada Maze, and then there was a little bit of work done in the Near East. So no real big breakthroughs, but the most significant thing about that particular expedition was the discovery of the Sentry Room, which was named such because that was where the cave officially hit the 100-mile mark. Again, it wasn't, in a big, glorious breakthrough area. It was just miles and miles of mop up or fuzzening that had gone on in the intervening time. So the sort of the golden spike, the century mark was not done on a big breakthrough, but on just a typical Lechuguilla mop up type survey. So again, this is what the cave looked like at the 50-mile mark in August of 1990. So between 1990 and December of 1998, the cave went from this to this, which is why we kind of call it the Great Fuzzening. And with that, I will open it up for any questions.
All right, thanks, Paul. There's one question that was asked in the chat box about the specific presentation about the expeditions. Are they still just 24 hours or had camping started yet? There was a response that camping was allowed at that time, but just wanted to give you an opportunity to expound upon that if you'd like.
Yeah, pretty much after the 50 miles, when we really changed from Lechuguilla Cave project to Learn is when the camps really expanded. So at that time, camping was allowed, and actually the 24-hour day trips were strongly discouraged. The big change with the cave management plan that was published in 96 was a reduction of the number of camps, because what we were finding was that the camps themselves were pretty big areas of impact, particularly because of disposal of liquid waste. And the park made the decision to cut down the number of camps to something that was a bit more manageable. And we actually cleaned up a lot of the older camps. So even today, we're not looking at the long day trips for anything, basically anything beyond EF Junction that has camping, and day trips are really only allowed from in the entrance area of the cave.
Great, thanks, Paul. Next question, on the topic of camping, what was the advantage of camping besides just staying underground longer?
The advantage was that the travel times to some of these areas were pretty big, and to push areas like South Winds, Wild Wild West, Northwest Passage, even from like what is now the deep sea camp, some of those trips were taking, even 5-6 hours to get all the way out to the end. So the advantage is you saved all that travel time, that kind of day-to-day travel time, and it was much more important later on, because we were really doing mop up. As Pat said, in the early days, you were kind of mocked if you did not come out of the cave with 1,000 feet of survey on every single survey trip, which seems crazy now, but it was just a lot easier to find going passage to survey. Now that we have to be much more methodical, the new passage is harder to come by. It's just much more efficient to camp. We have looked at ways to reduce our impacts because of the camping. Again, primarily because of the liquid waste, and that things are being done to try to maximize the amount of that's carried out, and there's been some science work to try to minimize the amount of that waste going into the cave.
Thanks for that, Paul. We've got about 6 minutes. I'm going to hop back over to some of the questions from the hydro portion at the beginning. Can you drink the water in the cave, or do you need to bring water in?
All the water in the cave is potable.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Can you give a brief history of the data loggers and installations?
Yeah, I think now, of course, it'll get a little fuzzy. I think we put in the first set of data loggers around the time when I first got to the park in 1999. And we maintained that set of loggers basically until I left in 2010. And then a different set of loggers that didn't require changing the desiccant and doing some of the maintenance. It was a little difficult in the tight quarters of Lake of the White Roses. So we changed them, but all of the data that you saw is all relative to a fixed datum, which is the survey, one of the survey stations down there. So all of the data that you see, and I've got some more continuous data logger data. It's all kind of re-registered to a common datum, so there's no issues there. The resolution on the loggers is basically less than 1/10 of a foot, or really just like a centimeter. So it is sensitive to very small changes. The graph that I had sent Peter and that he showed was basically a graph of the manual measurements that we took, and not the detailed logger data that shows all the individual fluctuations. Lewis Land and I did publish a paper, I believe in 2004 or 5, talking about the different flooding events and the effects on the water table there, and how that correlated with the groundwater wells that the USGS monitors in Carlsbad.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Question in the chat box was around what software is used to make cave maps, which is answered by Rod. Compass for the data, Illustrator for the maps. And there was a follow-up question on data. What backup protocols are in use for the databases and the photo documentation?
Basically, all of the photos that were supplied to the cave, or to the park, not to the cave, are on the park server, which is backed up. And that goes the same with all the data, the inventory database, the science reports that we get. All of that is backed up on the Park Service server. And then of course, all of the cartographers also have duplicate copies of the data and survey notes. There's actually a Google Drive that contains most of the scans of the survey notes, that's accessible to the cartographers, so that they can get that stuff to work on their maps. So there's a lot of redundancy to the data.
Okay, thanks, Paul. All right. How long does it take for surface water to make its way to the lakes in Lechuguilla?
Oh, the standard loaded question. It varies, and if you go to Jake's talk tomorrow, which I strongly encourage, he'll have a lot of information on that. I can speak to areas in Carlsbad where I actually did a direct dye trace, and upper levels of the cave, like around Devil's Spring, which isn't really that far in from the entrance. The actual time it took from water to get from the surface to Devil's Spring, and that's only through about 35 meters of rock and then falling through the air, took about 6 weeks. But for deeper areas like the Guadalupe room, it would take in excess of a year to get down there, and in some cases even longer.
Okay, thanks, Paul. All right, with about a minute left, one final question. Is there an estimate of how much cave passage there is total based on rate of discovery of new passage and fuzzening of passages?
You're asking me how many miles of unexplored cave are there? Probably, hundreds of more miles, and I'm certain there's going to still be some more significant breakouts. We're going to see even more fuzzening and breakouts from the talks later on today. But the airflow suggests that we've barely scratched the subsurface on that one.
All right, thanks, Paul.